The morning light hit me in a way it never had before, soft, almost gentle, but it couldn't mask the emptiness I felt deep inside. I had spent 40 years with the same man, and now, here I was, staring at a house that was meticulously clean but eerily silent, feeling like a stranger in my own life. This wasn't the life I thought I would have. After all these years of giving everything to my family, I finally realized maybe I was never truly needed in the first place. I turned 68 this year, and with it came the realization that life had gotten quieter, simpler. I no longer worried about the clothes I wore or whether my jewelry caught the light. For most of my life, I had believed that life would stretch out endlessly, that my years of sacrifice would eventually lead to a time of enjoyment, a time for me, but now I see it differently. It wasn't that my family stopped needing me. Maybe I was never really needed at all. It's strange how the years can slip by, unnoticed, until they hit you all at once. Standing in the kitchen, I stared at the dishes. My daughter, Emma, had so eagerly prepared, each one laden with heavy spices, all too much for my aging teeth to handle. As I looked at the extravagant spread, I realized I hadn't even been asked what I would like to eat. Not once. It wasn't that they couldn't remember. They just didn't care to. The disappointment wasn't new. It had settled into me quietly over the years, like dust in the corners of this house. My husband, Tom, still came and went as if everything was fine. No gift, no flowers, just his usual routine. He smiled when he walked in, made a comment about the food, and asked where his coffee was. The same routine, the same indifference. And me? Well, I was expected to smile and pretend that everything was as it should be. But I could no longer keep up the charade. Today, this birthday was nothing but an act, a show for the camera, a performance for Emma's social media followers. She told me that her followers loved seeing a daughter care for her aging mother, and so this birthday celebration had become just another moment to capture and share. The reality was colder than any camera lens could ever reveal. This was the moment I realized that the life I had given so much to had passed me by, and it was time to ask myself, was this really all there was? The morning of my 68th birthday. I woke up to the clatter of pots and pans in the kitchen, a sound so rare in this house that it almost felt like a dream. Tom, my husband, usually took his morning run at this time, and the house would be eerily silent, just the way I had grown accustomed to. But this morning was different. As I rubbed my temples and stepped out of the bedroom, I found my 7-year-old grandson, Noah, on the couch, his eyes glued to a tablet while cartoon sounds blared from the speakers. He didn't even notice me as I walked in. I was drawn by the smell of spices from the kitchen, a scent so heavy and inviting. It almost made me smile. There, I found Emma, my daughter, and her husband, Daniel, bustling around the kitchen, completely absorbed in their food preparations. Several dishes were already spread across the dining table. The aroma so strong, it almost made my mouth water, though I knew better than to get my hopes up. I walked over to the table and smiled, trying to keep my voice light as I asked, "Are we expecting guests today?" without even glancing up from chopping onions. Emma laughed, a cheerful sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom, don't you remember? We're celebrating your birthday early. My followers are busy living their own lives over the weekend, so I'll post the video on Monday. Perfect timing." I hesitated for a moment. My actual birthday was the following Tuesday. Today, wasn't it? Was it? But I shrugged it off. Maybe they were busy with work and couldn't celebrate later. An early celebration wasn't the worst thing. Honestly, for a fleeting second, I felt a little touched. At least they wanted to celebrate with me. That was something, I supposed. I glanced at the table again. The dishes they had prepared were overwhelming, heavy with spices and rich flavors. Roast meat sizzling, lobsters drenched in thick spices, and beef stewed in a fiery chili sauce. The only thing that seemed remotely light was a shrimp dish buried under a thick coat of garlic butter. I tried to smile, but it froze on my face. My teeth, my dentures, weren't made for food like this. I could barely chew through a sandwich these days, let alone something as tough as roast meat or lobster. My mind wandered back to the days when I had been younger, when I had given birth to Emma at 35. Back then, Harold, Tom's father, had been hoping for a boy, and though they remained polite, I could always sense their quiet disappointment when Emma arrived. I had been physically exhausted after giving birth, but there was no real care for my recovery. No one seemed to notice that I was struggling, that I was eating stale bread and overly sweetened juice. It was during those times that my teeth began to weaken. By the time I turned 60, I had no choice but to wear dentures. A few years ago, I had heard about dental implants, and for a moment, I considered getting them. But the cost, nearly $4,000 per tooth, was enough to stop me in my tracks. And when I mentioned it to Tom, he had shrugged it off, saying, "You really want to put those metal pieces in your mouth? That's disgusting. You messed up your teeth by not taking care of them. Look at me. I'm 2 years older, and I can still eat anything I want," Emma had added. "Mom, dentures are more convenient at your age. Why waste money? Save it for Noah's college fund. Back then, I convinced myself they had a point. Maybe at my age, eating softer foods wasn't the end of the world. But now, with each passing day, even the dentures felt like a struggle. Simple tasks like eating a sandwich had become a battle. So, when I looked at the heavy, spice-laden dishes on the table now, I couldn't help but feel a wave of frustration. Was Emma being thoughtless? Did she really forget that I couldn't chew half of what she had prepared? Or was it something deeper, that no one in this family had ever truly cared enough to know what I liked to eat, or even what I could eat, just as I was lost in thought? Tom walked in, timing it so perfectly it almost seemed rehearsed. One hand in his jacket pocket, the other holding his water bottle. His post-workout sweat clung to him, and there were no flowers, no gifts, just his usual routine. He looked at the table, gave Emma a pat on the shoulder, and grinned. "Wow, this is quite the spread. Your mom's really getting the royal treatment today. Don't remember you making this much of a fuss for my birthday." I managed a weak smile. He wasn't wrong. For his birthday, Emma had taken the entire family to a high-end restaurant downtown, complete with a private room, wine, and candles. But for my birthday, it had become nothing more than content for Emma's social media, a staged scene to be captured and posted for her followers. I picked up my tea and took a small sip. The bitterness coated my tongue, sliding down my throat and settling heavy in my chest. Noah was about to grab a piece of roast meat when Emma quickly stopped him. "Wait, Noah, I haven't started filming yet. Can you just hold off for a minute? And when the camera's on, remember to behave. Don't dive into your food like last time." She adjusted the camera's angle and raised her glass with a smile so perfect it looked digitally filtered. "Mom, today's your birthday. No matter how busy life gets, our family always comes together to celebrate. It's our tradition." Whatever small flicker of warmth I had left inside me was instantly extinguished. I watched as Emma, her voice carrying that cold tone, raised her glass again. Noah obediently recited the lines he had clearly been coached on. "Grandma, thank you for always taking care of me. I love you. Happy birthday. Wishing you good health and lots of happiness." I stared at this perfectly staged family scene, suddenly struck by how absurd it all was. Tom, seemingly touched, wiped a mist from his eyes, even placing a hand on my shoulder. "Sylvia, in all these 40 years, have I ever let you suffer? Look at us, our daughter, our grandson. They love you so much. We're a lucky family, aren't we?" His words sent a chill through me. In that moment, I finally understood this was all a charade. The sacrifices they talked about, their so-called love, it had all been for the cameras. It wasn't real, not for me. I had always tried to convince myself that family was everything. For years, I had believed that the love we shared could overcome any obstacle, but standing in that kitchen, surrounded by the clatter of dishes and the hollow smiles of those who should have known me best, I began to question everything. It wasn't just the food, though, that had been the last straw. It was the realization that, after all these years, my family didn't really see me. They never had. They didn't know what I liked to eat, what I needed, or what I even wanted. They simply assumed, just like they had assumed so many times before, that everything I did was for them. I had spent decades caring for them, sacrificing my time, my health, and my peace to make sure their lives were as easy and comfortable as possible. And in return, all I got was a series of empty gestures, hollow words, and a deep, gnawing sense of loneliness. The turning point came when I asked for something small, a birthday cake. It had been the only thing I truly wanted, not a lavish gift or an extravagant celebration, just a simple cake. I had made it clear to Tom weeks ago that I wanted an orange cake, something I had always loved. It wasn't even a big request, but it was something I had asked for. Yet, when the moment came, it was brushed off as nothing more than an afterthought. "Where's the cake?" I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Tom, standing at the doorway, smiled dismissively. "Oh, the cake, I was on my way to pick it up this morning, but I ran into Ruby. She said she had been craving it, so I gave it to her." I froze. My heart sank. It wasn't the cake. It was the fact that my small, simple request had been so easily ignored. I had asked for that cake, and Tom, without a second thought, had given it to someone else. Ruby, the woman who had always lurked in the shadows of our marriage, the one who had taken up residence in Tom's heart while I was left to clean up the mess of our lives. When I confronted him, asking why Ruby was more deserving of that cake than I was, he waved it off. "It's just a cake, Sylvia. Don't make a fuss. If it's that important to you, I'll get you another one tomorrow." His tone was light, as though my feelings were irrelevant, as if my years of sacrifice meant nothing. My voice caught in my throat. "Today's my birthday. Shouldn't there be a cake for me today?" At that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the cake, it was everything that had been building up over the years. The way Tom had dismissed me, the way Emma had made me feel invisible, the way they both acted like I was nothing more than a background player in their lives. Emma, in her usual calm but calculating way, tried to smooth things over. Right. We can't have a birthday without a cake. I'll order one right now," she said, pulling out her phone and pretending to make the call. But I saw through the act. She didn't care about the cake. She cared about how it would look on camera, how it would fit into her perfect image of the loving daughter, the daughter who cared for her mother on her birthday, all for the benefit of her followers. I could see it in her eyes. She didn't care about me. She cared about what I could give her, what I could provide for her image. I turned back to Tom, my voice low, steady, but sharp. If Ruby wanted the cake, why didn't she buy it herself? Why does she get everything, and I get nothing? Tom's face darkened instantly. His voice, once light and dismissive, now grew tight with irritation. Why can't you just let it go? Sylvia Ruby's been through a lot. You know that. I'm just trying to help her out. His words were like a slap in the face. They had become so used to the idea that I would always be there for them, that I would always put their needs above my own. But they never once considered what I needed, what I wanted, or what I deserved. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just the cake. It was the years of being overlooked, of giving everything and receiving nothing in return. They had no idea what it was like to feel invisible in your own home, to give and give without ever receiving the smallest act of kindness in return. When I looked around the table, I saw the faces of people I had loved, but I also saw the faces of strangers. I saw Emma, so eager to please her followers, so determined to maintain her image as the perfect daughter. I saw Tom, the man I had spent my life with, but who had never truly seen me, who had always prioritized everyone else over me. I realized that this was it. This was the moment when everything changed. I wasn't going to play the part of the obedient wife, the invisible mother, the quiet background character in their story anymore. I was done. I set my teacup down on the table, my hand shaking as I gripped the chopsticks. I looked at Tom, at Emma, and I asked them a simple question, one that carried years of frustration and pain in its weight. So, where's the orange cake? The room went silent. Even the background noise of Noah's cartoon seemed to fade away. For the first time in years, I felt like I had the power to speak my truth, to demand what I deserved, and I wasn't going to back down. It was time to stop pretending. It was time to stop being invisible. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a voice again. The day I confronted Tom was the day everything inside me changed. I had always been the quiet one, the one who kept things together for the family, making sure everything ran smoothly. I had swallowed my frustration, my hurt, and my disappointment for years, convincing myself that it was all worth it for the sake of the family. But that day, as I sat at the dinner table, watching Tom dismiss my request for something so simple, something I had asked for with nothing more than the hope of feeling seen, I realized that I was done. Where's the cake? Tom. The words slipped out of my mouth with a cold precision I hadn't known I was capable of. Tom, as usual, was caught off guard. He looked at me for a moment, then shrugged nonchalantly, trying to brush it off like it was nothing. Oh, the cake I ran into Ruby on the way to get it. She said she really wanted it, so I gave it to her, he said, his tone light, almost dismissive. He didn't see what was wrong with this. I felt my chest tighten. Ruby, the woman who had always been a part of our lives, lingering in the background like a shadow, always present but never quite welcome. And now she was the one who got what I had asked for, without hesitation, without a second thought. My small wish, the only thing I had wanted for my birthday, had been casually handed over to someone else. Tom's tone didn't change. If it's that important to you, I'll get you another one tomorrow, he said, waving his hand dismissively, as if it was just a trivial matter. It was just a cake. After all, Right. But it wasn't about the cake. It wasn't even about the birthday. It was about how little I mattered, how little I had ever mattered. I stared at him, the weight of those years of invisible sacrifice pressing down on me. My voice was steady, though it trembled with the sting of years of silence. Today's my birthday. Tom, shouldn't there be a cake today? The silence in the room was deafening. I felt the years of resentment that had quietly built up inside me surge to the surface. The years of looking after everything, doing everything, and never once feeling like anyone saw me. Emma, who had been hovering nearby, caught my eye. She didn't say anything at first, but I could see the shift in her expression as she tried to adjust her stance, her mind racing, calculating how to save face. Right, she said quickly, trying to smooth things over. I'll order one now. Can't have a birthday without a cake. Can we? It'll look great on camera too. The audience loves that kind of thing. The words hit me like a slap in the face. Of course, it wasn't about me. It wasn't about what I wanted. It was about what would look good on her social media, what would play well for her followers. Emma wasn't interested in my happiness. She was interested in making sure the family looked perfect for her audience. And I had been playing along with it all these years, letting myself be nothing more than a character in her little drama. I couldn't pretend anymore. My patience was gone. My sense of duty shattered in that moment. I turned back to Tom, my voice low but sharp, cutting through the air between us. If Ruby wanted the cake, why didn't she buy it herself? Why does she always get what she wants? And I get nothing. Tom's face darkened, the ease in his expression slipping away as he tried to justify himself. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? Ruby's been through a lot. Sylvia, I'm just trying to help her out. Help her out. Those words rang in my ears like a death knell. I had spent years trying to hold this family together, trying to make sure everyone was happy, everyone was taken care of. And now, I was nothing, a ghost, a background player in my own life. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and I realized something. It wasn't just Ruby. It wasn't just Emma. It was him too. All these years, he had never truly seen me, never truly cared about what I needed, what I wanted. My sacrifices had always been expected. It was never a choice for him. And now, he was so consumed with making Ruby happy. He couldn't even see that his own wife was standing in front of him, invisible, unheard. Why don't you just let it go? Sylvia, he said, his tone now tinged with irritation. Ruby's been through so much. Can't you just be a little more understanding? Understanding. I had been understanding for 40 years. I had given everything, all while they took, never asking, never considering. Now, I saw it clearly they never cared. I set my teacup down with a sharp clink. Why don't you think about me for once, Tom? About what I want, about what I've been through all these years. The room was tense. Everyone was silent, unsure of what to say. It was the first time in so long that I had spoken up for myself, demanded something for myself. The first time I had ever asked for something that wasn't wrapped in sacrifice or compromise. Emma, realizing that things weren't going according to her plan, spoke up. Her voice was sharp, almost scolding. Mom, stop being so difficult. This shoot is important to me. My followers are expecting this video. Why are you making a scene? Her words hit me hard. She had no idea what it was like to feel invisible, to give everything and receive nothing. She didn't know what it was like to be so utterly disregarded by the people who should have cared for her the most. I stood up then, slowly, with a steady resolve. You want to know why I'm making a scene? Emma, I asked, my voice steady but filled with years of repressed emotion. Because I've spent my entire life playing along. I've done everything for this family. And I'm done. I'm done being invisible. I'm done playing the part of the dutiful wife and mother. This time, I'm putting myself first. The silence that followed was thick, but in that silence, I felt a strange sense of freedom, a weight lifting off my shoulders. This wasn't just about the cake or the birthday. It was about finally seeing the truth and refusing to stay silent any longer. I looked at Tom one last time, my voice soft but resolute. I'm done. I'm done with all of this. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I want a divorce, Tom. For years, I had swallowed my frustration, my hurt, and my disappointment. I had convinced myself that the sacrifice, the quiet endurance, was for the sake of the family. But this time, I wasn't willing to accept the suffocating silence anymore. It had become clear to me there was no love here, not the kind I had always believed in. Tom blinked at me, clearly stunned by my sudden declaration. His jaw tightened, and I could see the disbelief flicker across his face. But that was the moment when everything changed for me. I had spent decades watching him go on with his life, his priorities always elsewhere. I had watched as Ruby, the woman who had secretly lingered in the background for years, became the focal point of his attention. It wasn't just about the orange cake or the lack of attention to my needs. It was about the constant erosion of my sense of self. At that moment, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. The years of neglect, the unspoken emotional betrayal, the disregard for my feelings, they had finally caught up to me. And though the thought of leaving Tom, of leaving everything behind, terrified me, I also felt a strange sense of liberation. It was as though the heavy weight I had carried for years was finally lifting, one breath at a time. Tom's voice snapped me back to reality. Sylvia, you can't be serious. We've been together for 40 years. You're just going to throw it all away. His voice was thick with disbelief, but there was also something else, resentment, maybe, or fear. The fear of losing control, of losing the life he had built, a life where I had always been the dependable, dutiful wife, never questioning, never demanding, but I had reached the end of my rope. I've already made my decision. Tom, I said, my voice calm but firm. This isn't just about the cake or the birthday. It's about everything that's happened over the years. The way you've neglected me, the way you've put Ruby first, the way you've made me invisible. His face darkened, and for a brief moment, I saw the man I had once loved, but that version of him was gone. The man standing before me now was a stranger who had allowed me to fade into the background of his life, a stranger who had put everything before me, including Ruby and his own pride. I turned to Emma, who had been silently watching the scene unfold. Her face was a mixture of frustration and confusion. Mom, can't you just stop? Why are you doing this now? You know this isn't the right time for you to be making such a big decision. You're 68. This is crazy. Her words, though spoken in a tone of anger and frustration, stung in a way I hadn't expected. She couldn't understand. She couldn't see why this wasn't just a tantrum or a momentary outburst. To her, I was always the one who could be relied on, the one who would always bend for the sake of the family. But this time, I couldn't bend. Not anymore. I'm not doing this for you, Emma, I said, my voice steady but laced with years of pain. I'm doing this for me because I've spent my life doing everything for everyone else, and I've lost myself in the process. I'm not going to do that anymore. The silence in the room was deafening. Tom shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't say anything. Emma, for the first time, seemed unsure of how to respond. I could see the confusion and disbelief in her eyes. She had never seen me like this, strong, resolute, unwilling to back down. For years, I had been the silent pillar holding up this family, never asking for anything in return, never demanding to be seen. But now, standing in the midst of this broken family, I knew that I deserved more. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was finally free. I've made all the sacrifices, I continued, my voice softening slightly. I gave up my dreams, my health, my time, all for this family. But none of you ever asked me what I wanted. None of you ever considered what I needed. And I can't keep living like this. Emma's face twisted into something almost like guilt, but it was fleeting. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up my hand to stop her. You don't have to understand, Emma, but you will one day. You will see that sometimes. It's okay to let go. It's okay to choose yourself. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm choosing me. As I stood there, in the middle of the life I had known for so long, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new, something that was mine. I had spent decades living for others, but now it was time to live for myself. I picked up my purse, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision I had made. I'm leaving, Tom. I've filed for divorce, and I'm not looking back. Tom stared at me, his face a mixture of shock and confusion, but I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was looking at the door, the path that lay beyond it, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. The moment I made the decision to leave, a strange weight lifted from my chest. I had spent so many years carrying the burden of unmet needs and unspoken pain. But now, standing in front of the door, I could feel the freedom just beyond my reach. I had always believed that family was everything. I had devoted my life to them, raising Emma, taking care of Tom, always putting their needs before my own. But I couldn't do it anymore, not after everything. Not after the years of silence and sacrifice, of feeling invisible, of giving everything and getting nothing in return. I had walked away from the house, from the family I had tried so hard to hold together, but there was only so much a person could take. The promises made to me, the empty words, the casual dismissals, they had finally caught up with me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. Tired of pretending that everything was fine when it was clear that it wasn't. Tired of pretending that I mattered when it felt like I never truly had. The decision to leave wasn't easy, but in that moment, it felt right. It felt like I had finally done something for myself, something that was long overdue. The years I had spent caring for everyone else had drained me, had worn me down to the point where I didn't recognize who I was anymore. I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be heard, and so I left. I didn't know where I was going at first. I didn't have a plan. But what I did know was that I needed to get away, to find myself again. That's when I remembered my mother's old house. It was a small place, a simple house, tucked away in the corner of a quiet neighborhood. It hadn't been lived in for years, but I knew it well. I had spent many years there, growing up in its small, cozy rooms, It wasn't grand or extravagant, but it had always felt safe. It was the one place in my life where I had felt at peace, and now it would be the place where I could rebuild. When I walked through the door of my mother's house, I was hit by the smell of aged wood and dust. It was faint, but it was there a smell that reminded me of simpler times, of a life before all the complications. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The house was small, but it was mine. It wasn't filled with the grandeur or the expectations of the home I had left behind. It was quiet, peaceful, no one to please, no one to serve, just me. I spent the next few hours cleaning. I scrubbed the floors, wiped down the windows, and made sure every corner of the house was spotless. The physical labor was soothing, almost cathartic. With every swipe of the cloth, I felt the weight of the past start to lift. I wasn't just cleaning the house, I was cleaning my soul. I was clearing away the remnants of a life I no longer wanted, making space for something new. As I worked, I found myself thinking about the years I had spent in that other house, the house I had shared with Tom and Emma. I thought about the moments of sacrifice, the days of silence, and the times when I had put myself last. I thought about the way Tom had never really seen me, how Emma had only cared about her own image. But most of all, I thought about the woman I used to be. I had been strong once, vibrant. Somewhere along the way, I had lost her. But now, I felt her stirring again. She was still there, beneath the years of neglect and hurt, waiting to come back to life. By the time the house was clean, I was exhausted, but in a good way. There was a sense of accomplishment, a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. I collapsed onto the bed in the spare room, the room that had once been mine as a child. The bed was small, the sheets old, but it didn't matter. It was mine. It was quiet. And for the first time in so long, I felt like I could breathe again. When I woke up the next morning, the sunlight was streaming through the window. It was a soft, golden light that filled the room with warmth. I sat up in bed, looking around at the familiar surroundings. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start. I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I didn't have to pretend to be something I wasn't. For the first time in decades, I could simply be. I spent the next few days getting to know myself again. I revisited old hobbies, things I hadn't done in years, reading, knitting, gardening. I found solace in the small, simple things. I felt a sense of freedom in taking my time, in not having to rush, in not having to please anyone but myself. One afternoon, I made a cup of tea and sat outside in the small garden, the sun warm on my skin. As I sat there, I realized something important. I had spent so much of my life waiting for others to see me, to appreciate me. But now, I realized that it wasn't about them. It was about me. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity, my happiness. The past few years had been filled with pain, but they had also taught me something valuable, that no matter how much we give, no matter how much we sacrifice, we can't lose ourselves in the process. We can't forget to take care of our own needs, to nurture our own hearts. I looked around at the small, quiet house and smiled. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. The day I left felt like the heaviest but most necessary decision I had ever made. I had spent 40 years of my life trying to hold everything together. I gave my heart and soul to my family, to my marriage, to my daughter, and to the idea that one day It would all come together. But that day never came. I had long since realized that I had been playing a part in someone else's story, a story where I was always a supporting character, never the lead. The emotional weight that had been building up over the years finally collapsed when I made the choice to leave. It wasn't easy. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't even know where I was going at first, but I knew I couldn't stay another moment in that house, in that life, pretending that I was okay with being invisible. I was done pretending. I grabbed my things, the clothes I could fit into one suitcase, and headed toward the door. The house that had once felt like home now felt like a prison. I walked out into the cool morning air, leaving behind the life I had built, the life that had worn me down to nothing. The hardest part was leaving behind Emma. She was my only child, and in so many ways, I had sacrificed everything for her. I had always tried to be the best mother, the one who put her first, the one who gave and gave without ever expecting anything in return. But somewhere along the way, I had lost myself, somewhere between the endless duties, the expectations, and the love I tried to give. I had become a shell of who I once was. Emma had been the one I had fought for the most, but even she had started to take me for granted. She had always been caught up in her own world, her social media, her image. She had never once asked me what I needed, what I wanted, or what I thought. Her love, or what she called love, was conditional. As long as I played along with her expectations, as long as I kept up with the act, she was happy. But the moment I stopped, the moment I refused to be just another character in her carefully crafted storyline, everything changed. I didn't want to leave Emma behind, but I also knew that if I didn't leave now, I would lose myself completely. I had spent decades giving her everything, making sure she was happy, even when it meant sacrificing my own joy. But in the end, it wasn't enough. She didn't even notice when I started to disappear. She didn't see me. Not really. I left without a word to her. I couldn't face the disappointment in her eyes. I couldn't hear her excuses or justifications. I needed space. I needed time to breathe, to figure out who I was without all the roles I had played for so long. I needed to find Sylvia again. The first few days were hard. There was a sharp emptiness that came with leaving everything behind. No phone calls, no messages, no one to check in on me. But that emptiness soon began to feel different. It wasn't just a void, it was freedom. It was a chance to reclaim my life. I found myself walking down streets I hadn't been on in years, rediscovering places I used to visit, things I used to love. I started to remember who I was before I became someone's wife, someone's mother. I had been so focused on others for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to do something just for me. I spent a lot of time alone at first, and though loneliness crept in, I also found peace. The stillness allowed me to think, to reflect. I found solace in the quiet, in the small things. I rediscovered my love for painting, something I hadn't picked up in years. I began to write again, jotting down thoughts, memories, and dreams that had been buried under years of sacrifice. One afternoon, after several days of being alone with my thoughts, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was living, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly alive. The weight of my past decisions, the guilt, the anger, all began to melt away as I focused on the present. It was like waking up from a long, exhausting sleep. It wasn't long before I heard from Emma. At first, it was a brief message. "Mom, where are you?" followed by a string of phone calls that went unanswered. I didn't respond at first. I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure I could go back to the place where I had been invisible, where my needs didn't matter. But then came the day she arrived at my doorstep. She looked different, thinner, older in a way that made my heart ache. She didn't come with anger or accusations. She came with something I hadn't expected: vulnerability. She was broken. She had been struggling. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she held herself. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "I can't do this anymore. I've lost myself too. This family, this image I've been creating, it's all falling apart. Dad's sick. He's not the man I thought he was. And Ruby's not who she said she was. She's a fraud. She's been lying to us, and I feel like everything I've built is falling apart." Her words shocked me, but it was the tears in her eyes that really hit me. For the first time in my life, Emma was asking for help, not in the way she had before, but in a way that made me see her as a human being, not just the daughter I had sacrificed for. It was a sobering moment, one that made me realize that she, too, had been living in a false reality. She had been chasing an image, just like I had. I listened as Emma poured out her heart, telling me how she felt like she had been failing her family, how the weight of the lies had crushed her, and I realized then that maybe, just maybe, we could both heal. Maybe this wasn't just about me walking away. It was about rebuilding, starting over, together. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we could both find our way back to who we were meant to be. The moment I realized that I had been living in someone else's shadow, my world shifted. For years, I had convinced myself that my role as a caregiver, as the steady hand holding everything together, was enough. I had spent decades living in the background, sacrificing my own happiness and well-being for the sake of my family, thinking that love and dedication would eventually be reciprocated. But as the years passed, it became clear that no one had ever truly seen me, not for who I was, but for what I could do. My life, my identity, had become nothing more than a series of duties and sacrifices, with no room left for my own desires, dreams, or even my own peace. The final straw came when I confronted Tom about the orange cake. It wasn't just about the cake. It wasn't even about my birthday. It was about something far deeper, about how, for years, I had been overlooked, ignored, and taken for granted. It was about how every little thing I had done to keep the family together was brushed off as unimportant, as if I was just a function in the family machine, not a person with my own needs and wants. When I asked Tom where the cake was, a simple request that seemed so insignificant to him, he casually shrugged it off and handed it to Ruby, a woman who had been hovering in the background of our marriage for years, the same woman who had, in many ways, always been more important than me in Tom's eyes. His casual dismissal of my feelings, his blatant disregard for something as simple as honoring my request, was the moment I knew I couldn't keep doing this. But even more than that, it was Emma, my daughter, who had spent so many years trying to be the perfect daughter, trying to curate a perfect life for her followers, who had failed to see me for who I was. She didn't see the years of exhaustion on my face, the weariness in my soul, or the emptiness in my heart. She saw only what she wanted to see, the dutiful, silent mother who would always play along for the sake of the family's image. It was in that moment, when I saw her frustration and irritation with my outburst, that I realized she wasn't just blind to my needs. She had been taking me for granted, too. I had spent so many years trying to make her happy, trying to be the perfect mother, trying to create a life she could be proud of. But in doing so, I had neglected myself. I had lost sight of who I was, and in return, she had lost sight of me. My love for her had always been unconditional, but the love she showed me, when it came down to it, was conditional. It depended on whether I played the part she expected. It depended on whether I kept up the facade of the perfect family. That was when I knew I had to make a change. It wasn't enough to leave Tom, or to leave the house I had spent so many years caring for. It wasn't enough to just walk away from them. I needed to walk away from the role I had been playing, the role that had swallowed me whole. I needed to find myself again. The days that followed were filled with a strange sense of freedom. I spent hours thinking, reflecting, and for the first time in so long, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't suffocating anymore. I wasn't stuck in a role that didn't fit me. I had room to think, to be, to rediscover who I was beneath all the layers of expectations and obligations. And then came the moment that changed everything. I went back to my mother's old house. It wasn't much, just a small, quiet place where I had spent some of the best years of my life. It was old and worn, but it was mine. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could rebuild, where I could finally be myself. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of what I had lost, but also of what I could regain. I could start over. I spent the first few days cleaning, just cleaning. The house had been empty for years, and I felt the need to bring it back to life, just like I was bringing myself back to life. The physical labor was cathartic as I wiped down the windows, scrubbed the floors, and cleared the dust from every corner. I felt the weight of the past begin to lift, the pain, the disappointment, the betrayal. It started to fade away. Each stroke of the cloth was a step toward healing, a step toward finding my own peace. By the time I was finished, I could feel the difference in the air. The house felt alive again, filled with the quiet hum of my own thoughts, my own life. It was small, simple, but it was mine. I wasn't living for anyone else. I wasn't playing a role anymore. I was simply living for me. The first night I slept there, I sank into the bed, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath me, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in so long, I felt a sense of peace. I didn't have to worry about Tom's neglect, Emma's expectations, or the constant strain of keeping up appearances. I could finally rest. I could finally be myself. In the days that followed, I found myself rediscovering things I had forgotten about myself. I picked up old hobbies: painting, writing, knitting, and I began to remember the woman I had once been before I got lost in the demands of family life. I started to smile again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I was learning to enjoy my own company, to appreciate the small moments that made life beautiful. And then, one afternoon, Emma called. She asked to see me. At first, I didn't know what to expect. Was this a plea for forgiveness, a desperate attempt to bring me back into the fold? But when she arrived, she looked different. Her face was drawn, her eyes tired, and there was something in her voice that spoke of regret. She told me about everything that had happened since I left, how the perfect life she had been trying to create had started to unravel. She told me about Ruby, about the lies, about how Tom had fallen apart without me. She apologized, truly apologized, for not seeing me, for not understanding what I had been going through. I listened, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to fix things. I didn't feel the need to protect her or hold her up. I was finally able to see her as she was not as my daughter, but as a person who, like me, had been searching for something she couldn't find. We talked for hours that day, and when she left, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected. It wasn't that I had forgiven her. It was that I had finally found a way to let go of the past. The past no longer had a hold on me. I was free. As I sat back down in my chair, I realized that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning, a beginning of something new, something I hadn't imagined for myself, but something I was finally ready to embrace. I had spent so many years living for others, but now I was ready to live for me. The woman I had been was still inside me, and I was ready to find her again. The days following my decision to leave were a blur of emotions I wasn't sure how to process. At first, I felt relief, an overwhelming sense of freedom that came from finally breaking away from a life I had spent years trying to fit into. But soon after, an unsettling loneliness began to creep in. It wasn't that I missed the chaos or the constant demands of family life. What I missed was the idea of it, the dream of what I had always hoped my family would be. And when I left, that dream shattered in a way I wasn't prepared for. I had always thought that by putting my family's needs first, I would be rewarded with love and respect in return. I had spent so much of my life devoted to them raising Emma, making sure Tom was happy, always adjusting myself to fit into the mold they wanted. But over the years, I had become invisible. They no longer saw me as a person. I was just the background figure that kept everything running. And when I stopped playing that role, when I stopped pretending, they didn't know what to do with me. It was strange to be alone again. The house I had moved into, my mother's old house, was small and quiet. I could hear the soft rustling of the trees outside, the hum of the wind through the windows, but nothing else. The silence felt like both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it was peaceful, like a cool breeze on a hot day. On the other, it reminded me of everything I had left behind: the family, the life, the routine that had been so familiar. But as the days passed, I began to feel a shift inside me. I had always thought that if I could just give more, if I could just sacrifice a little more, everything would get better. But now I saw the truth. It wasn't about giving more. It wasn't about doing more for others. It was about finding myself again. I had spent so long trying to make others happy, trying to fit into their expectations, that I had lost sight of my own happiness. So I began to do the things I had once loved, the things that had been forgotten in the chaos of family life. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. The colors on the canvas felt like an extension of me, an expression of who I was beneath the layers of mother, wife, and caregiver. It wasn't about making something perfect. It was about finding joy in creating. I also picked up knitting, something I used to do as a child, sitting with my mother by the fire. It felt like coming home in a way of reconnecting with myself, with my past, and with the woman I had forgotten. The stillness of the house gave me space to think, and as I spent more time reflecting on the past, I began to understand why I had left. I had spent years trying to hold my family together, believing that my sacrifices would eventually lead to a sense of fulfillment, a sense of appreciation, but instead, I had become a martyr to their needs. I had become a shadow of myself, giving so much of myself to others that I had nothing left. It wasn't just Tom who had failed to see me. It was Emma, too. The phone calls began shortly after I moved in. At first, it was Emma. She called, left messages, and texted, asking where I was, if I was okay. She didn't understand why I had left. But in her voice, I could hear something else: frustration, confusion, maybe even a bit of guilt. She couldn't see it, but I could. She had never really seen me, not the way I had seen her. To her, I was just the mother who had always been there, the one who made sure she had everything she needed, the one who fixed everything. But I wasn't a person to her. I was just a role to be played. When I didn't respond, the calls started coming from Tom. He didn't understand either. The anger in his voice was unmistakable. He said I was being dramatic, that I was overreacting. He told me I was being selfish, that I needed to think about Emma, about him, about the family. But I had thought about them for 40 years. I had given them everything. And what did I have in return? A hollow smile, a forgotten request, an unspoken truth. But even in the midst of my anger, I understood something. They didn't know what they had lost until it was gone. They didn't realize how much I had done for them, how much I had sacrificed, until I stopped giving. And maybe that was the wake-up call they needed. Maybe they would understand someday, but it wasn't my responsibility anymore. It wasn't my job to make them see me. I had spent too many years trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect wife, the perfect person for them, and in doing so, I had forgotten who I was. A few weeks passed before Emma finally showed up at my doorstep. She looked different. There was a tiredness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was worn down, not from the physical demands of life, but from the emotional weight of the facade she had been carrying. She apologized. She apologized for not seeing me, for not understanding what I had been going through. She told me how difficult it had been since I left, how Tom had been distant, how she had tried to keep up with the expectations she had placed on herself. And for the first time in years, I saw her for who she really was, not just my daughter, but a person who was struggling with her own sense of identity. She wasn't perfect, and neither was I. But in that moment, we both began to understand something. Love was not about perfection. It wasn't about living up to expectations. It was about seeing each other for who we truly were and accepting that we were both flawed, both lost in different ways. We talked for hours that day, and when she left, I felt something shift. It wasn't a magical reconciliation, but it was the beginning of something new. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the chance to build something real, something that wasn't based on sacrifices or expectations, but on truth. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew that it was my time to start living for myself. The day Tom and I had that final confrontation was not the explosive, dramatic scene I had once imagined it would be. No, it was far quieter than that, filled with a calm resignation that I had never felt before. The years of sacrifice, of giving everything I had, of staying silent while my needs went unmet, it all came rushing to the surface. And in that moment, standing in the midst of the house I had given so much to, I realized I was no longer willing to live that way. The house was as empty as my heart had felt for so long. When I had moved in with Tom all those years ago, this house had been filled with dreams. I had been full of hope, full of life, ready to create something beautiful. But over the years, it had become a place of routine, of expectations, of quiet resentment, It wasn't the place I had once imagined it to be. It was a place that demanded everything from me, but gave nothing back. Tom stood there, his back to me, looking out the window, his posture stiff, his face blank. He had always been the one in control, always the one who made decisions. He had always expected me to fall in line with whatever path he chose, to follow his lead without question. And for years, I did. I supported him. I was the wife, the mother, the dutiful woman who kept the house in order, who cared for the children, who made sure everything was perfect. But no one ever seemed to notice the cost of that perfection, the toll it took on me, the silent exhaustion that wore me down over time. I had been so busy holding everything together, so focused on everyone else, that I had forgotten about myself. It wasn't until I was sitting there, staring at him, that I realized how little he had truly seen me over the years, how little he had really known me. The man who had promised me the world had instead built a life for himself, with me in the background, playing the role of the perfect wife, but never really being part of his story. He had never really asked what I needed, what I wanted. He had taken for granted that I would always be there, quietly fulfilling my role without complaint. But I couldn't do it anymore. I had finally stopped playing along. I had stopped pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. And that's when the truth hit me. It wasn't just about the little things. It wasn't about the birthday cake or the way he had never understood the things I liked. It was about the years of being invisible, the years of not being seen, not being heard, not being valued. It was about the way he had dismissed my feelings, my desires, my very existence, for years. I had convinced myself that I was doing the right thing, that by giving everything to my family, I was making them happy. But in the end, I realized that my happiness, my fulfillment, had always been secondary to everyone else's needs. I had poured my soul into this family, only to find that they had never truly seen me for who I was. And now, standing in the living room, I understood that I could no longer be the one to hold it all together. The silence between us stretched on, the weight of unspoken words heavy in the air. I felt as though I had been holding my breath for years, and now, finally, I was exhaling. The decision I had made was final, but it didn't come without its own sense of loss. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was simply exhausted, and I had reached the end of my rope. Tom, sensing the finality in my words, turned around slowly. His face was a mixture of confusion and frustration, but I could see something else there, regret. It wasn't enough, but it was there. For the first time, he seemed to realize the weight of what I was saying. "Sylvia," he said, his voice low, "you don't mean this. After everything we've been through, you're just going to walk away." I met his gaze, my heart steady but heavy. "Yes, Tom, I mean it. After everything we've been through, it's clear that we've been living two separate lives, and I can't keep pretending that this is what I want anymore." He took a step closer, his face tightening. "What about Emma? What about the family?" I looked at him, the words weighing on me. "The family isn't just about being here. It's about being seen. And I haven't been seen for a long time. Tom, not really. Not the way I needed to be." He opened his mouth, but I stopped him. "I've spent too long being what everyone needed me to be, but I've forgotten who I am. I can't do that anymore." The silence between us thickened. He didn't say anything. He didn't know what to say. And for the first time in years, I didn't care. I didn't need him to understand. I didn't need his approval. I just needed to walk away. "I'm done, Tom," I said. my voice calm but final. I'm done trying to please everyone. I'm done being the one who holds everything together. It's time for me to start living for myself. As I turned to leave, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. It was as if I had finally taken the weight of a lifetime off my shoulders. The future was uncertain, but it was mine. I didn't have to stay in a life that didn't fulfill me, that didn't honor who I was. I was free. I walked out of the house that had once been our home, and for the first time in years, I felt the freedom of choosing my own path. Today, I want to share a story about awakening and the strength it takes to rediscover oneself. After many years of dedicating myself to my family, I realized that I had lost sight of who I was. I lived for others, sacrificing everything to maintain the images and expectations they placed on me. But eventually, I realized that I couldn't continue this way. When I made the decision to step away from that life, I found myself again a woman who is strong and ready to live true to my own dreams and desires. The lesson I want to share with you is, never forget yourself in the journey of caring for others. Love yourself, and never be afraid to stop, to find your happiness and freedom. We all deserve to live the life we truly want, not just to meet the expectations of those around us. If you resonate with my story and find value in it, feel free to leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button to hear more inspiring stories and life lessons. Let's build a strong community together where each of us can find the strength to change our own lives.